Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I just wanted to let folks know that there will be a chance to ask questions, but as we go, you can type your question in the Q&A dialog box at any point in time, and we'll be able to answer your question. And also, just so folks are aware, we are recording the webinar, and anybody who registered will make sure that you get a link to the recording after we are done. I am going to turn the floor over to Vanessa Lynch. Vanessa is the Pennsylvania campaign coordinator for Moms Clean Air Force. Vanessa?
Thanks, John. Well, we're really excited to be here today to talk about our roadmap to a healthier future for Pennsylvania families, leaving coal behind webinar. I am going to be the host for today and just wanted to frame this out for everyone. Over the last 2 years, the Trump administration has worked to extend the life of Pennsylvania's dirtiest power generation source, coal. And despite strong economic, health, and environmental reasons that we really have to leave coal in the past. Today, we have experts who will talk about how coal extraction impacts local communities, air pollution, and the cost of power for all of us on our electricity bills. At a time when affordability is such a key part of our conversations, that's an important part of how we think about how we want to move forward in Pennsylvania. So our first panel, I am excited to introduce Sarah Sweeney and Gavin Marinchek. Sarah is a Greene County, Pennsylvania native, originally a member of Center for Coalfield Justice. She's now a community organizer, focusing on the impact of fossil fuel extraction. She works in frontline communities in Washington and Greene counties to empower people to protect themselves and their neighbors. And Gavin started as a fellow at the Center for Coalfield Justice before transitioning to a community organizer and now holds the organizing director position. He oversees the development of community organizers and leaders in the community, and Center for Coalfield Justice's organizing work covers the economic and public health impacts of oil and gas, as well as coal extraction. So they are amazing helpers to get this information out and to help us learn about coal. And I'll leave it to you two.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So my first question for you today, Gavin, is in the present day, out of all of the impacts of the coal industry, minor health and safety can often get placed on the back burner, but it's still a very critical issue. Can you tell me about some of the ways coal mining operations can put workers' health and safety at risk?
Yeah. So as many people know that there are fewer miners than ever right now, but the rates of lung conditions such as silicosis are actually increasing rather than declining. Research shows that miners are developing lung conditions at a much younger age than ever before. And this seems to be because as coal supplies degrade in quality and density, mining operations actually have to grind and disturb a lot of stone in order to get at the coal that they want. Um, when stone is disturbed and ground up in this way, it releases silica dust, tiny particles of rock about 100 times smaller than a grain of sand into the air. This dust gets deep into miners' lungs and seems to attack more aggressively than even traditionally how people think of coal-based black lung. Back in 2024, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, which is the federal body that oversees coal mining, published the final version of the silica rule, which was meant to enforce new safety standards for miners, lower silica exposure, and ultimately implement stricter medical monitoring. However, due to lawsuits and political pressure, this rule has still not been implemented as of today. Earlier this year, CCJ joined labor groups, miners, and concerned folks in front of the Department of Labor in DC for an action related to trying to get this life-saving rule finally implemented. So while the fight to get these protections implemented is still very much alive, the longer it takes to enact, the more unnecessary risk working class people are being forced to take. In addition to health risks associated with silicosis and black lung, Physical workplace safety concerns are still very much alive, which people probably think about even less in 2026. In May of this year, a young man lost his life underground after a section of coal and rock collapsed onto him during operations at Bailey Mine in Greene County. A short 2 months later, in July, a second worker unfortunately ultimately passed away from injuries sustained after being engulfed by falling coal spillage while shoveling beneath a coal silo at the very same mine. If that wasn't terrible enough, two employees at the mine have come forward in recent weeks with claims that the company retaliated against them after raising safety concerns. They say they were berated and reprimanded, reassigned to other parts of the mine, and ultimately lost their jobs because they spoke out about concerns on behalf of their fellow workers. They are now pursuing legal action. This is unacceptable behavior from a company, but especially from one worth billions of dollars. When these tragedies occur, it affects not just the miners, but their entire families and the communities of people that know them. Safety should always be placed above corporate profits, and then sometimes that's unfortunately not the case. So that kind of lays a little bit of the groundwork of modern worker safety and some of the stuff that we experience in the realm of workers. But I'm now going to kick a question to Sarah to talk some more about the community members and how they're impacted in our area. So, Sarah, in addition to growing up in this area, you have organized here for a couple of years now. In your experience, how is the legacy of coal still negatively impacting communities?
Yeah, so we recently had a resident at a Know Your Rights event. Those are events we regularly hold in these communities, say, and I quote, "I just hope I'm dead before the mine comes through. I don't want to deal with it." Coal mining has undeniably had a lasting effect on our communities, from exposure to things like toxic coal ash dump sites, subsidence damaging properties and creating safety risks for landowners, to the continued disruption of people's lives due to these ongoing active mining operations. Earlier this year, the federal government actually moved to roll back standards and protections around coal ash production and disposal that communities like ours have fought very hard for to achieve under the previous administration. In 2024, in neighboring Westmoreland County, we actually saw a woman, her name was Elizabeth Pollard, had lost her life when she fell into a sinkhole that had opened up into an abandoned 1950s coal mine. A recent report showed that of 260 claims of structured damages by mining in the state from 2018 to 2022, only four of those were actually repaired. Out of that 260 claims, four was repaired. When these issues occur, the mine operators often buy out residents, which results in large swaths of land in our local communities owned by industry. Those homes then sit abandoned for years at a time, a lot of times degrading, obviously. So our local economy was built on these mining operations, but when a mine leaves the area, there's also harms from that. Residents have their taxes reassessed and end up paying more in taxes than ever before just to keep their local schools funded. So when the coal is gone, the money is gone, and it's a strain an already struggling community often can't afford to pay. Now, I'm going to kick another question back to you, Gavin. While companies have long acted in a way that puts workers and communities at risk, it is critical that miners and fossil fuel workers are also able to transition to good family sustaining jobs. So, what just transition options are there for mine workers, and what's the next step for a healthier future?
Yeah, absolutely. So even organizations like ours who criticize companies very often, it's very important to remember that they're made up often, especially at the lower levels of working class people. And those people are still very much people and they still contribute to their communities and are critical to the advancement of any new industry. Um, so recently, we've been building relationships and are really optimistic for the future of these skilled workers when groups come together to find meaningful solutions to just transition issues. Over the past year, CCJ has been collaborating with United Mine Workers of America and a sustainable jobs organization called Union Energy to advocate for the creation of a workforce to plug orphan and abandoned wells. These wells were drilled decades, even more than a century ago, to extract oil or gas, and there are potentially hundreds of thousands of orphan and abandoned wells that need to be plugged. Abandoned orphan wells leak planet warming methane and pose safety risks like frackouts, which is when an unconventional drilling operation or fracking comes into contact with abandoned conventional wells and could potentially contaminate local water supplies. In Greene County, the United Mine Workers Career Center is operating the only well plugging apprenticeship program in the country. And a few months ago, they ended up signing a collective bargaining agreement with their first employer. So it's a go, it's happening as we speak. The intended outcome here is to protect our health and environment by plugging these polluting wells, which is where someone like CCJ really came in for supporting this at first, while also providing family sustaining union jobs for many who are struggling to find employment as the industry begins to dwindle, no matter how many attempts are made to prop up industries, the economics of things, and just the way the world's moving is still over time causing people to lose their jobs and they need a place to find a new home. Of course, there are also many opportunities for workers in a clean energy future. A great example in Pennsylvania is the Solar for Schools project that passed the state level. Not only does it give schools a grant to install solar and lower their utility costs, it also provides quality jobs to people that cut pollution and emissions at the same time. Well, this project program only applies to schools. It provides a blueprint for how clean energy projects can be deployed in a way that creates good, sustainable jobs in communities throughout Pennsylvania and can do so into the future. So those are the couple things that CCJ wanted to add about really how coal is still impacting frontline communities and the people that work there, while also finding a productive path forward for folks in a just transition and prioritizing the community in the area and the community of people who have for generations worked in these industries. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah and Gavin. That was really helpful information for all of us to understand and to think about. Our next panel will include Jackson Zeiler and Mitch Hescox. And this panel is really going to be focused on health impacts from mercury and air toxics to that impact the health of women and children to health harming particulate matter, which is also called PM 2.5. The cost of coal to health is astronomical, and these two gentlemen are incredible advocates to help us understand those costs. Jackson received his Master's of Public Health from Columbia University and is currently working at the Environmental Health Project. He has a certificate in environmental health policy, and he studied the health protective impacts of environmental policy through cost-benefit analyses. He has worked as an intern at FEMA and as a health and science communicator at a climate change research organization and at various public health nonprofits. At Environmental Health Project, Jackson supports the organization's research efforts in understanding the health impacts of polluting industries like shale gas extraction, petrochemical facilities, and data center generation more recently. Mitch, on August 1st, 2023, after 15 years of service, the Reverend Mitch Hescox was named President Emeritus of the Evangelical Environmental Network. Reverend Hescox continues to speak nationally and internationally on creation care and its impact on human life, especially for children. He works on the biblical mandate to steward God's creation and regards climate change as the greatest moral challenge of our time. The Reverend Hescox consults on policy issues in energy, climate change, sustainable farming, and the threat of pollution to human health and life. And he is also co-author of Caring for Creation, the Evangelical Guide to Climate Change and a Healthy Environment, with nationally known meteorologist Paul Douglas. So, gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, and want to thank Mitch for joining us with his years of expertise. Also want to note we were also going to be joined by Nina Gentariel with the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, but she was unable to join us today, but still wanted to plug Alliance for Healthy for Nurses, Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, rather for just some great resources if you wanted to check out their information. But before jumping into some questions for Mitch, I kind of wanted to provide a little framing just about the mercury air toxics and standards, which also known as MATs, which were finalized back in 2012. Before MATs, more than half of coal plants in the U.S. had been built with no pollution controls whatsoever, and there was no national mercury limit in place at all. So these standards set the first ever federal limits on mercury and other hazardous air pollutants like arsenic, lead, nickel, and chromium, as well as acid gases for coal power plants generating more than 25 megawatts. It's estimated that they prevented 11,000 premature deaths annually, and 130 cases of childhood asthma attacks were prevented. We've also seen a decrease in blood level mercury mercury levels in blood for U.S. women by about 34% in the decades after the decade rather after MATS was implemented. In February of 2026, just this year, the EPA finalized a repeal of the stronger updates to that that was placed by the Biden administration in 2024. We're reverting it back to the original 2012 baseline and eliminating the real-time monitoring requirement that let communities see what their local plants were emitting. And to put that into perspective, that basically means that power plants in Pennsylvania, like Keystone and Conemaugh, continue to operate under the original 2012 MATS limits, not the stronger 2024 standards, and without any new monitoring requirements. So just to stop there and to kind of bring in Mitch's perspective here, Mitch, I wanted to ask you, just in plain terms from your perspective, what does living near a coal plant like Keystone or Conemaugh actually do to a person's overall health or a child's health for that matter?
Well, actually, especially, before 2012, it was sheer hell, to be honest with you. But with 2012, significant progress was made in MATS and gases and other things that were the HAPs were the acid gases, the minerals. And we did see great reductions. But from Pennsylvania's point of view, one of the big tragedies is that the 2012 rule never covered waste coal, especially around the old anthracite mines throughout Pennsylvania, one in Johnstown, or excuse me, in Evansburg as well. And those plants, their mercury levels are 3.5 times what even bituminous coal plants are. So being around a plant, you get exposed to particulate matter, PM 2.5, which is just an idea about it is so fine that it goes right through our lungs, into our bloodstream, and into our brain. It's 120 times smaller than a human hair. So just think of how fine that is to get through. And that's just a source of it. And it's actually responsible for 12 different forms of death in the United States. And having some striking things, it's also believed to be one of the leading causes of dementia now, because not only does PM 2.5 have dirt, little soot pieces to it, it has arsenic and cadmium and heavy minerals and other things that are attached to it that make it literally a death instrument for so many people. And fossil fuel combustion is the largest source of PM 2.5, both in the forms of power plants and also from especially diesel trucks and diesel areas. It's one of the reasons in larger cities that women who live close to a lot of freeways, especially in the African American community, have a 1 in 5 chance of having a miscarriage. And the largest reason for a miscarriage is intrauterine inflammation. And the largest cause of intrauterine inflammation is PM 2.5. And just to give you a comparison, it goes from 1 in 5 in poor people's communities to the rest of the country at being 1 in 9. So actually people who live in environmentally polluted areas, like close to a power plant or whatever, are basically twice as likely to be impacted by pollution as anybody else. And just one other note to think about that is pollution doesn't stay in one spot. It blows with the wind or travels with the water. And 37 of Pennsylvania's counties all do not meet at least one air quality standard. And what's interesting about that is those 37 counties are the only ones that have monitoring equipment. We don't know about the other 37 counties. I mean, I grew up in a coal mining town. My dad was a coal miner. My grandfathers were coal miner. Both of my grandfathers died of black lung. I spent 14 years in the coal community. And if you want to see a dead town, go to Blandburg, Pennsylvania. It's where I grew up. They just started finally reclaiming the strip mines back there that were mined in the 50s in the past couple of years, thanks to some of the money the federal government provided. When I was there, the town was maybe 700 or 800 people. Today, I'll bet it's less than 100. No stores, no gas stations, there's no nothing. It's a wasteland. And so that's what living beside even coal mines or power generation plants can do.
Thanks for that perspective. That's very stark imagery. So looking at sort of what this administration's action on mass enforcement has done, why does it matter that it keeps, these plants operating under the 2012 rule rather than tightening things further?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is that it actually steps up the enforcement of the mercury and air toxic standard. It's been very successful. I mean, we've seen 85 to 90% of mercury come out of the air in the eastern United States from the match rule, which is great. From my perspective, we've seen anywhere from back when I started working on this in 2008 and 2009, 1 in 9 children born in the United States had brain damage and IQ drop from mercury poisoning generated from primarily coal-fired power plants. That number has gone down to about $200,000 a year. So we've increased by about 2/3, but we still leaves us a third to go. There are still mercury fish advisories in every state in the United States, including Pennsylvania. It warns you of how much mercury to eat. So the first rule did a good job, but the second rule really built upon the success of the first match rule to make it happen. And it also, without a doubt, helped close down a lot of coal-fired power plants that were very old, that were not economically viable to retrofit with mercury equipment on it. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing now with the Trump order to reopen some of these coal plants, to reuse them. I mean, like Conemaugh and Keystone here in Pennsylvania, they're going to reopen and burn coal again and just spew out mercury again without it. And as I mentioned earlier, the waste coal industry, another source of mercury in Pennsylvania, again, completely open to spewing as much mercury as they want to at the sake of our children's lives and health.
So you got a little bit to this, and I think your first answer, but a lot of what we hear about, these combined emissions being the most hazardous part is like their cumulative impact. And right now, there's not a very good way to understand. There's a good way to monitor each individual plant, but in combination, when they're close together or even far away, as you mentioned, the impacts can go, many miles away. But when we look at facilities like Keystone and Conemaugh, which might, have cumulative impacts just due to them being near to each other, from your experience, what does that cumulative impact mean when you sort of stack these plants into one area for the residents that are nearby?
Yeah, again, some of it's dependent upon what the wind is happening on any given day, but on stagnant conditions, it's like anything else. The more you pour into it, the higher concentration you have of a particular toxin or poison, whether it's PM 2.5 or mercury or ozone. And let's not forget that ozone is generated by these plants too, as well as the introduction of carbon dioxide, which causes climate change. So, nobody wants to have an additive effect of just adding up, making the whole poison a stronger cocktail. And that's essentially what it does by having these plants close together and do that. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that and really look at that. You mentioned real-time monitoring. That's one of the advantages of real-time monitoring. We can know how much each plant is putting up. We go downwind a little bit and we can see what the concentrations are. Are they dissipating? Are they being stagnant? Are they hurting people right then and there? And that's one of the real dangers of taking away the real-time monitoring and this reversal back to the 2012 rule.
So, given these insights, kind of what you've shared about the health concerns on this, the health problems on this issue, uh, and from your perspective, if not more coal, then what? What is the realistic alternative for these plants and for these communities, and what would it actually take to get there from both a policy perspective and maybe an alternative energy perspective, or whatever your insights are on that.
Well, I'm personally think that we can do a lot with offshore wind. I also think Pennsylvania has a wonderful opportunity for solar. I think for utility size solar. And I know a lot of the big transmission companies are actually promoting that. If having a large solar arrays, battery backup, um, using the offshore wind that Trump's trying to kill and destroy in his initiatives. I'm personally not opposed to the new modular reactor systems. They're small reactors that don't have any nuclear waste. I think there's a lot of potential in that as well. We'll see what happens with the restart up of was called 3 Mile Island, and that's a conventional fission reactor. But I think those things are much better than any fossil fuel. We could talk for hours, and the people could talk for hours that are on this call about the leaking methane and the dangers it causes from all the fracking that happens in Pennsylvania and even the old conventional spots, whether it's leaking wells, which were mentioned before, old wells, abandoned wells, which still happen to about 600 a year. And it costs, $130,000 a well to fix, to seal a fracked well. And we've left us to pay for it. So I know we're starting to run out of time here, but I think there are a lot of good, smart alternatives that we can all use and take part of. And we just have to set and be practical about it. I believe our next panel is going to talk about, the cost of coal. Everything beats coal except for conventional nuclear power in the pricing of it. And I think we look at the economics of it. You're right. How much did our utilities bill go up in Pennsylvania? Mine went up 15% just in June 1st. And I think we need to address those and beware of those. And thanks. And, one thing before I close off here, I just wanted to give a shout out to Mom's Clean Air Force. I've been working on mercury in this thing since 2008. And I can tell you that it was the efforts of my former ministry, or the Evangelical Environmental Network, and Mom's Clean Air Force that actually made the 2012 match rule. It made it through the Senate, thanks to the work of us. And even though who's no longer our senator, one of the champions of that, of a Pennsylvania, was Senator Bob Casey, who voted not to kill mats and was a star in my book because of that.
Thank you, Mitch. This was really helpful insight. I always value your expertise. I'll pass it back to Vanessa to tee up the next panel.
Thanks, Jackson and Reverend Hescox, for those kind words about Mom's Clean Air Force as well. We are always working to center children's health and air pollution issues, and clearly mercury and air toxics is where Mom's Clean Air Force started. So a very important issue to us. Up next, we have a discussion of the economic impacts of coal power generation, which are definitely some of the most stark reasons for why coal no longer makes sense for generating power in Pennsylvania. Our two panelists for this conversation are Joanne Kilgour, who is an environmental lawyer and nonprofit professional with a passion for justice and democracy. Her work is informed by work that she's done with the Center for Coalfield Justice and Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapters. Joanne is committed to securing social, economic, and environmental policies that support communities with demanding long-term structural change. And Joanne is with the Ohio River Valley Institute Executive Director. That's right, Joanne, Executive Director. Okay. And then we have also Nick Messenger. Nick conducts applied microeconomic and econometric research. Say that word 10 times fast. Anyway, research into local economic development strategies, tax and industrial policy, and energy economics. He specializes in geographic and econometric modeling with large data sets to statistically evaluate the real impacts of policy changes on community prosperity. He earned his PhD in agricultural, environmental, and developmental economics from the Ohio State University, and his research has been presented at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP28, the North American Regional Science Conference, and the Southern Regional Science Association's annual conference. His work has also been featured in national media outlets, including NPR, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and The Hill. I mean, good grief. So excited to hear you guys talk, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and thanks to the previous panelists. This has been really excellent. So Nick, I'd love to start by just having you do some level setting. How healthy is the coal economy overall, and how did we get here?
Yeah, before I do that, Vanessa, I'm sorry you got the long version of my bio there, and you got the academic conference version with all the econometric fancy stuff. But data work is what I do, and so let's talk about the data we're talking about level setting. Coal, you have to kind of zoom out to the Industrial Revolution to now, right, to really see the whole picture of coal. And the heyday really comes in the second half of the 20th century, right? We built 88% of the coal plants in the United States between 1950 and 1990. 1990 is kind of like the high water mark for the percentage that comes from coal of our electricity across the United States, something like 52% of what we used in 1990 came from coal. Today, that's down to under 20, 16 to 18%. But when you look at the economic benefits in Pennsylvania, you go from, somewhere around 16,000 coal mining jobs in 1990 at that heyday down to under 5,000 today, right? About 4,600 coal jobs as of last month in the state. So 25%, right, of what it was at its peak over close to 40 years ago. In the United States, that story is very similar. About 178,000 coal jobs in the mid-1980s, down to 38,000 nationally today. So I always kind of think it's interesting when we see, especially in election season, right, and we see politicians kind of this coal, we've got to revitalize the coal industry, it's the backbone of the economy, right? I don't think it's a political statement to say that coal's economic importance has been generally on the decline for the better part of 4 decades.
So that's a great segue because, we hear a lot of rhetoric, particularly coming out of this federal government, about reviving the coal industry. And even with the investments that have been promised, does keeping aging coal-fired power plants online and this idea of reviving coal-fired power plants actually make any economic sense?
The short answer is no. One of the things that happens in the course of history is that technology changes things, right? It's no shock that coal has declined in prevalence since the Great Recession. And that's in part because the cost of things like solar panels have dramatically dropped, right? Over a 90% reduction in the cost of solar panels from 2010 to 2026. And so we've seen an incredible amount of solar capacity come online, right? In our region, we've seen the natural gas boom, right, in the mid-2010s. And we've seen the rise of gas-fired power plants, right, which have their own pollution profile and their own challenges. But we've seen these new alternative technologies, right, that are much cleaner than coal in varying degrees, right? Solar much cleaner than coal, natural gas a little bit cleaner than coal, but maybe not sufficient to solve the health problems that we were talking about earlier. But as those technologies progress and things become more efficient at producing electricity, there's a natural kind of march of progress in time, right, that goes against the coal industry and against the kind of massive loss that you get when you burn something, right? When you burn something, you lose a bunch of energy. It's heat. It's hard to capture it all. It's hard to convert all of it into usable energy. The laws of physics start to work against you. And so reviving that is like someone saying, right, well, we don't need to go to electric vehicles. We actually need to go back to the horse and buggy. Right? We actually could go back and, wasn't it so great when we had horses and everybody had a stable and you could ride your horse around, right? That's, to me, when someone says, well, we got to revitalize the coal industry, right? That's kind of how it hits to economists. It's like, well, no, technology advances, right? And the reason it advances is not because of politics, right? It's not, politics and subsidies and things can kind of move the needle a little bit, but when something overwhelmingly drops the way coal has since 1990, when you see these huge declines, right? It's not just the United States, by the way, right? People who want to say, well, that was politics, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, both Trump administrations, the Biden administration, they're all against coal, right? That's the reason it's dropped for 40 years. It's down 50% across all industrial countries in the world since 1990. Right? This is not a United States phenomenon. This is a technological phenomenon. And so going backwards just really doesn't make sense. It's expensive, it's dirty, it's less efficient than the newer technologies for electricity generation. And so really I view it as the ultimate kind of political statement you can make, right? Of just purely about politics is saying, well, we've got to revitalize the coal industry, right? You're playing to a base in that particular subset of the economy.
So you mentioned these different periods in time where we're seeing technological advancements or new technologies coming onto the scene. And one of the things that has become impossible to ignore in the recent year has been data centers. And so data centers consume significant energy and have become part of this conversation around what is the future of coal plants or other coal assets in our region in particular. And so as you think about data centers and energy consumption, how can Pennsylvania best meet that demand from an economic perspective?
Yeah, I think it's probably no question that the data center surge has delayed retirement plans or made some of the utilities look twice at their coal assets. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that there's always an inflection point, right? Most of these coal plants are extremely old, right? Decades and decades old and require a large amount of maintenance and updates. And you're burning hot things inside them, so they have to be realigned and fixed and maintained. And that maintenance, at scale can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Into the billions of dollars. And so each of these plants kind of hits that inflection point where a company has to decide, a utility has to decide, do I want to make that investment? And if I do, how long does it have to continue operating and earning for me to pay back that investment, right? That goes on to ratepayers, right? I'm going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm going to request a rate increase. I'm going to have people pay their electricity bill. Their utility bill is going to go up to pay me back for maintaining this coal plant. And the calculus there around data centers is, well, geez, we have all this demand that's going to come online, and we might not have enough supply, right? And so there's a tension between, do you keep the coal plant online and reline it and invest hundreds of millions of dollars to keep it going, or do you invest that hundreds of millions of dollars into an alternative, more efficient, cleaner technology, right? If you're a utility, we've seen a big push for data centers to bring their own power, right? Most of them are choosing to bring natural gas, which is bringing emissions and all kinds of kind of new pollution to areas of the country and the state that have not had it before in these agricultural areas. Ultimately, my view personally is that the best way to meet the rising demand from data centers is through renewable energy, right? These are some of the wealthiest companies in the world who are making hundreds of billions of dollars in capital investment. And so to me, the marginal cost of them well, let's try to keep this coal plant online, let's build a natural gas plant, right? The most surefire bet in terms of being on the cutting edge of the next 40 years, right? 30 years would be you actually power data centers with renewable energy, right? Whether that is solar and wind, whether that revives a discussion about nuclear, right? I'll leave that up to people who know way more about those components than I do, but I just don't see a way that investing in trying to keep a 50-year-old coal asset online is the best or smartest way to keep up with the demand, right? It kind of feels like an emergency, like, oh my gosh, we weren't prepared for this. And I think that anytime you're making those types of knee-jerk reactions and sinking hundreds of millions of dollars into an aging coal plant, you're probably gonna regret that decision, whether it's in 2 years or 10 years.
So, Nick, you've done a lot of work analyzing the economics of phased coal plant retirements. As we're talking about aging coal assets, And some of your work has looked at pairing these phased coal plants retirements with community investment and energy efficiency programs. What has that work taught you about the economic opportunities of a clean energy future?
Yeah, well, I think so. I'm talking in the abstract, right? Economists, we're talking about the big picture and the trend and the numbers and the data. But the reality is that you've still got people who work in this industry, right? And one of the things that can become very heated, I think, politically is when we say, oh, we've got to go to solar, we got to go to renewable, coal's too dirty, we got to get rid of it, we're going to move on, time marches on kind of thing. People feel left behind, right? So there has to be an intentional policy decision making around, hey, this transition is going to put 4,700 people in Pennsylvania out of a job if we make it, right? That is not a good thing for those 4,700 people. So how do we invest or pair these changes with policies that lift up and support and bridge that gap for those 4,700 coal miners, for people who rely on this economically, right? One of the examples that was presented at COP28 that we worked on was in Centralia, Washington, which had a coal plant that was home to about 600 workers in this very small rural community, about an hour and a half south of Seattle, right on the border with Oregon. And one of the unique things that happened there is when the utility retired the mine and the power plant, they created a community grants program. So they said, well, we'll put, $50 to $75 million into a fund, and the community can have various different people sit on this board, and we'll distribute these in different ways throughout the community, ranging from let's, replace the old boiler system at the school, and let's get solar on the school, to let's open some new community college pathways for worker retraining, to let's revitalize downtown, right? And get some grants going to help folks open restaurants or entrepreneurs in the community, and I kind of call this, if anybody's familiar, I'm a baseball nerd, so I love the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt, right, about the Oakland Athletics. And there's a great scene where they've traded away their big home run hitter, and everybody is so upset. How are we going to replace this guy? He hits all these home runs. The team's going to stink. And Brad Pitt, and the folks say, well, we're going to replace him in the aggregate. So we don't just have one guy who hits 40 home runs. We're going to go get a guy who hits 10 home runs. We're going to get another guy who walks a lot. We're going to get another guy who steals bases. And we're going to build a true team, right? Where all 9 guys on the team together are more productive than this one guy. And I think a lot of the transition has to really be thought of in that way, right? An energy efficiency program is a job creator. It is not a 600 job creator in the same way that a coal plant was in Centralia. But what we actually saw in the data is that all these different small investments in aggregate, right, actually built a much more robust, complete economy for that region. And the region has actually reversed job losses that predated the coal plant closing, right? So the region has actually changed its trajectory in a way that is on an upswing from even before the coal phase out, right? And I think that's really a remarkable kind of story. Now, exactly what worked one-to-one in Centralia, Washington might not work in Pennsylvania or West Virginia or every little town in our region, but I think communities and the state really have to say, let's figure out how to replace coal in the aggregate, right? The economic impact of coal. And I think there are ways to do it.
Thank you so much, Nick. And thanks very much to Moms Clean Air Force and all the panelists for this collaborative webinar. I think we covered a lot of really important ground. And Vanessa, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to Nick and Joanne. That was some incredibly helpful information about economic issues for sure. We can open it up to questions if there are any. I don't think there are. John, do you see any questions?
No questions in the chat or the QA dialog box, Vanessa.
All right. So I'll take that as none, but thank you all to all of our partner organizations, including the Center for Coalfield Justice, Environmental Health Project, Alliance for Nurses for Healthy Environments, and the Ohio River Valley Institute for sharing all of their incredible expertise. There's no time to waste in taking coal-fired power plants offline and centering cheap, clean, renewable energy and battery storage, and helping our coal communities make that transition is a really important part of that conversation as well. Data centers' increased demand for power has to be met with smart, clean energy strategies, not used as an excuse to prop up fossil fuel power generation for all of the reasons we've talked about today, from communities to health to economics. It just doesn't make sense. So families across Pennsylvania are depending on us to get this transition away from coal power plants right in order to decrease energy bills and make sure our children have clean air to breathe. And I know that we can do it. And I know that we have been doing it over the last 40 years, according to our friends at Ohio River Valley Institute. And so really want to make sure that we're continuing this work in a way that that honors those in our state who are also working in our coal mine industry. So thank you so much to everybody for all of your help today, and look forward to seeing you all in future webinars.